Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hello, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I am a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University and associate lecturer at the Open University and an independent writer, speaker and consultant through critical early years. Now, throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting oracy in primary and early year settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to introduce Michael Gardner as today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Mike. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you, and thank you for inviting me onto this.
Brilliant. And before we get started, perhaps you could just give a brief introduction about yourself for our listeners.
Of course. So I'm Mike Gardner. I am the founder of the Oracy Shift, where we're on a mission to get oracy into the heart of education across the country. With thought leadership and CPD and joining podcasts such as this lovely one. In my day job, I'm teaching and learning lead at the Maritime Academy Trust, which is a set of 13 primary schools across South East London and Medway and Kent. In that role, I wear many hats. So I run our ECT program, I lead our CPD pathways for experienced teachers, and I go into schools and I coach and work with subject leaders and classroom teachers and ECTs on a daily basis. So many hats that I wear, but I love it. And I get to travel across many schools and see many different children, which is great.
Brilliant. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about oracy in formative assessment. So the first question I want to ask you, Mike, is how can teachers use oracy in their assessment practices?
So when I was thinking about this before, I looked back on some of my notes around some of the theory around it, and I was looking at Vygotsky, and Vygotsky had this concept of the zone of proximal development, the ZPD, which lots of people will know, and that Goldilocks zone. So getting children slightly out of their comfort zone, but within a space where we can help them. And I think oracy is really useful for that because it helps the teacher to unpick any of those misconceptions with children. It helps to model with the children new learning rather than just going over things that the children are already comfortable with. So oracy in that space is really important because you can't just let the children go and struggle and fail without any sort of support or scaffold in place for the sort of next time. So that's where I would start with it, is looking at that. I think very famous research from John Hattie looking at how much teacher talk there is and trying to shift that balance and get a rebalance of teacher talk and learner talk. So going from the 80% of teacher talk that his research shows and trying to get a better balance so learners are leading on their own dialogue, analysing things between each other, deepening each other's responses. And I think that's really powerful. And I think research shows that children learn really well from each other, not just from adults. So we need to encourage that and see how they can progress alongside each other.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying now about that shift from teacher talk to learner talk. And in early years contexts, that's perhaps slightly easier with a more play-based way of teaching and learning. What's that like in schooling contexts where you've typically got one teacher, one teaching assistant, 30 kids, and it can be really difficult to move towards that pedagogy where students themselves are talking more?
I think you're spot on. I taught in nursery for a bit, and it was all about giving them the prompts and observing and watching and sort of playing alongside. When you go into Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 and beyond, the curriculum has become a lot more knowledge-based and a lot more about learning facts and less about the skills that we want our young people to develop. So we need to make sure we get that shift towards those skills and those abilities. Is tricky because a lot of people run off of schemes and PowerPoints and slides. Myself, I do like, sometimes a good visual on the screen, but I really like those opportunities for those talk structures in the class. And as an NQT, way back when I started, I'd be running around and I'd feel like I've worked harder than the children. And when I see ECTs now, I say to them, you need to pass that responsibility for the learning over to the children. And you're there to facilitate, to observe, and to sort of prompt them. But that learning happens amongst them on the tables. So coming away from the screen and just pointing at facts and worksheets to let's analyze this together. Let's problem solve together. Let's collaborate through talk. But the teacher's not dominating. The teacher is there and guiding, but allowing the children to. And you'll be surprised, those children, even from year 1 up, they own it and they come up with some great insights and they learn from each other because everyone's got schema. Everyone has knowledge. Which about the teacher's role is to draw it out of the children.
There's something there about following and listening to the child's voice, isn't there? Which in a sense gives them a lot more agency over their own learning and how they come to approach particular content topics. So I'm wondering about, based on your experience, what you found to be the most effective strategies for moving towards that learner-centered talk and what works in this context.
Yeah, so I think it works at different levels. I think you need to start, and when I go into schools where oracy is not as embedded as it could be, I say to them, look at the whole class first. Look at what you're doing as a teacher. Because just like with parents and children, the children look to you, and not just you, but also the support staff and all the adults. What are they saying? What are they doing? How are they interacting with the learning? And they look to you as a role model, and they really pick up and they copy and mimic what you do. So I always challenge the teacher, say, what are you doing with your language as a whole class first? And one of the things I like to do is that thinking aloud. So maths is one of my passions. When I was maths lead, it was one of the things I really tried to get into staff's minds is, what are you doing when you're modelling that method? How are you talking aloud? Is that visible learning? Oh, I've made a mistake. Where do I need to look? And I'm asking the children to do no talking, but just to observe and see what I'm doing. So I think at a whole class, that's really important. We also use in some of our schools gestures. So agree, which we tend to do, agree, build, and then challenge. These non-verbal gestures are really good to get all children engaged. So when there's a question or someone's given a point, they can all have their opinion, even the ones that maybe are too anxious to share in the class. That, as a part of formative assessment, is also really useful for a teacher, because if someone said something that is correct, but everyone's disagreeing and challenging, you might need to stop and go, oh, is there a misconception that everyone's sharing? Or is there one child that maybe has a different opinion to everyone else? Can we discuss it and unpick what they're doing? So there's things to be done at the whole school level. I think there's also things to be done at the group level. So when group can be many things. It can mean a table of 4 or 5 children. It could be a small intervention group. It's even your shoulder partner, your AB partner. One of the most common ones that we see in school is think, pair, share. So in essence, give them thinking time. They pair up and talk, and then they share with the class. One of the downfalls of that usually is the waiting time. So a teacher asks a question. This is the think part. 10 seconds later, and now talk. For some children, processing speeds and being able to get their responses together takes a lot longer than that. So it takes a bit of confidence for the teacher to give a bit more time for that thinking and that sharing. It could be a really powerful way, but sometimes it's misused and doesn't have the impact. Another one that I really like, and teachers sometimes say, I've never heard of that, is talking chips. So when I was in year 2, we'd give them imaginary talking chips, because as soon as you give a 6 or 7-year-old something in their hands, their brain suddenly switches to fiddling and playing with it. So you give them 2 talking chips, and you give them the question or the prompts, and then around their table, they have their pot in the middle, and whoever puts their chip in the pot gets to have their opinion. This is a task that is practicing active listening, turn taking, but then the next person needs to build on what they've said. They can't just ignore what the last person said. They need to build on it. And the reason why they may have a second chip, once everyone's had an opinion, someone might say, actually, I need to change my opinion, or I've listened to you and I want to build on that. That's a really good way to sort of balance out that learning so everyone has a voice. And thinking about the children that might have a communication need or a learning need, or English is not their first language, doing it at a small group table where they're more familiar and it's safer than a whole class can really bring out some of that personality and some of those more introverted faults. In terms of the individual level, if we go down to that, is that metacognitive reflection. So we use lots of exit tickets, or children saying, I used to think and now I know. So what have I learned in this short space of time, and can I articulate it to myself and reflect on what I've developed? So there's layers to it, but it starts with the teacher. What are we as adults doing with our language to help the children develop theirs?
I guess there's something there about the leadership team within the school supporting the teachers to then support the children. Would that be fair to say that you do need the support of the whole school on board to be able to enact these slightly different but certainly more beneficial strategies in terms of oracy?
100%. It's if it doesn't come from the top in terms of the buy-in, and this is something we value, then it just won't land in the long term. So having it in your teaching and learning policy, is it part of your school development plan? Is it part of your values that talking is what we do? Is it in your behaviour policies and how you interact with children? And also, when I go around classes and we do learning walks, is it part of that? I like to say that, not the word monitoring, but when you're going around, are you looking for those talk structures? Are you celebrating where they are there? And are you supporting teachers that haven't quite got it right by bringing in other more, experienced colleagues? So if it doesn't come from the top, a teacher on their own can do stuff, but as soon as they move another class, then that familiarity and those routines are not there. So yeah, the leaders are really essential in that process.
Systemic issues require systemic solutions in that regard, I think is what I'm drawing up from what you're saying. I really liked the talking chip activity that you were talking about, insofar as it kind of balances out the power of some children, because often you have a classroom and you want to implement a situation where they're talking more, but inevitably sometimes that means that some children talk more than others. So more generally, I'm thinking about how a teacher would manage that situation outside of talking chips, where some children tend to dominate with their voice at the expense of others. And how would you respond to that challenge?
It's tricky because you don't want to dampen the confidence and the enthusiasm of a child who loves to speak, but you're right. There's usually two or three that really like to dominate. I often go into classes and I see hands up, and like you can imagine, the ones that know the answer and are confident will put their hands up, and sometimes teachers that are in a rush or panicking will choose that child for the sake of getting the answer to move on. So I tend to try and avoid that, and whenever I pose a question in my class, at least, or when I'm sort of team teaching with others, is say to them, you've given them a question, now give them a chance to talk about it on their tables. And then you and your support staff, whoever, are helicoptering around and listening for some of those great responses. And it might be you say, A's talk to B's, but B's, you're going to share with us what A's said. So they have to listen. It's not just about them, it's about somebody else. And yeah, sometimes the more confident ones get a bit downbeat when they don't get chosen, and they're waving their arm in the air and, oh, choose me. But you do choose them at times, but I think it's about choosing at different levels. You don't need to have everybody respond to the whole class. Sometimes success for a very, very anxious child might be that they've just spoken something to you in your ear and whispered it, or they've written something down and their partner's said it because they've debated it between them. So oracy can be successful at many levels. But having said that, part of it also is that presentation and that ability, that self-efficacy to be confident and stand up. And so we need to give opportunities for children that maybe are more confident and less so to have that. But you have to be very nurturing and very gentle, especially with the younger ones, in how you get them to that place. So not to sort of traumatize them or make them back off because they're like, oh, I don't want to be here because it's too frightening. So it's got to be a safe way.
And there's a connection to well-being and confidence that we'll pick up in the next episode. But for now, thank you so much, Mike. I'm taking a lot away here in terms of the need to reflect upon Vygotsky's zone of proximal development and meet learners where they're at and ensure that they're scaffolded appropriately. You gave a range of really useful strategies that teachers might be able to implement in their classrooms on a daily basis. But we also spoke about the challenges of that and the need to ensure that this is systemically implemented to respond to supporting all children's oracy skills across the school in different classrooms. So I'm certainly taking away from a lot from this, and I hope listeners are too. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest Mike for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Shaddai Tembo, and Mike Gardner. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.